Blah.
Welcome to movie number 1 for 31 days of Halloween 2022. We have a weird situation. We're driving in the car right now. We just got out of the movie. It's called Smile. I knew absolutely nothing about this movie going in. I was completely blind. I started seeing posters for it, a little bit of virility in its campaign, its internet campaign, marketing campaign, cool looking poster, which is funny because I saw a short called Smile at Genre Blast that dealt with rictus grinus in and of itself. But before I dive into this review, I'd just like to introduce my friend Darren, who will be popping up once again in the near future when we go to see Piggy. Darren is my neighbor. He's a friend. We used to work together, and we're both Alamo nuts. So, you know, because he lives literally down the hill from me, it's like, hey, you want to go catch something? Yeah, let's go catch something. By the way, I don't know how the audio sounds on this thing because we have a really crazy makeshift situation here. But
we're being innovative.
Right, we're being innovative as we drive home from the first movie. I'm going to let Darren jump in here and start us off with his thoughts and opinions about what we just watched. Darren, go ahead.
So before I get into it, am I allowed to talk spoilers?
Yeah. Okay. We totally are going to do spoilers.
I think that the first 2 acts I really dug for the movie because everything felt surreal in how this entity is following this person and there's no way to know how to deal with it. And then she starts piecing it together. But I think that for me, it was hard to separate it from certain things that I've seen do it better. I felt that the opening was practically just It Follows, of setting up the exposition scene of saying, this is all the rules, this is what's going on, it's gonna get you, good luck. So it felt very much like that, but without the punch that It Follows had. I think that the movie, although I liked most of it, it was really too heavy on the jump scares. And it felt like it was going more in this is Hollywood's version of It Follows, whereas It Follows found a way of being unsettling, and I think that's more effective in the storytelling. And then, I guess I would say, what do you think about that before I get into the final act?
No, get into the final act, because
Okay.
Finish your thoughts,
so
and then I'll dive.
The final act, there comes a point that starts the third act where CG gets involved, when CG wasn't involved leading up to that. And immediately I knew, okay, this is going to be like the remake of it, where everything leading up to that didn't have CG, and it was very effective seeing the clown make all these gestures and just natural face tics that he was able to do, and that we had that consistently throughout. And then we get to the third act, and now we're getting CG. So I knew the final act was going to be bad shit. And it was bad shit. To you, positive. To me, I was like, I think it's too much now. I think it lost me there because it got a little outside of the box. It felt almost like Raimi-esque, that third act, when the first 2 were not. I guess that's how I felt about that. What are your thoughts?
Right on. Okay, so I'm on the other side of the coin. I absolutely fucking love this movie. Holy shit. Just blew me out of the water. You chimed in on all the things that I was thinking in terms of, this is It Follows, this is The Ring, and this is It. So you have It Follows, and The Ring. All of the things that those things are, except just simplified and streamlined. It doesn't spend any time trying to tell you, hey, this is what this thing is. You know, it's exactly what it is. It sets you up like It Follows, and it scares the friggin' bejesus out of you. It's always there. You know, we get the same threatening aura, but instead of something that's constantly following you at like a really slow pace, you just don't know when. You're just never safe. You're always vulnerable. And that's ultimately what the creature, this entity, its goal is to basically turn you insane. And it does so by chipping away at your sanity, ruining your life, and it takes a period of 4 to 7 days to do so. It does the very classic story device of showing us the end and then showing us how this process happens. It's very simple, it's very minimalist, and it's very effective. I love the jump scares. We saw this movie at 10:30 at night.
Yeah.
We were both, our eyelids were getting heavy. We both wake up early in the day. So to get this jolt that I don't normally get from going to see a movie, like, it's so rare for a jump scare to actually be effective. And it just made me, every single time it happened, it made me giggle with glee. It was exhilarating. What's interesting, again, to go back to this idea of like it and like the thing that scares you. So it's not very clear what this thing is, but what is interesting is the protagonist, she has a secret that she's been hiding. It alludes to it a little bit at the beginning. And then basically she has this idea that the only way that I can like get rid of this thing, there's some, and here's the other thing too, the plot, I loved the structure of the plot because they, you know, everything was pretty airtight, man. It was all show and no tell, in that like you watched her, we were with her, and there was no scene where it was like, and this is what it is, and this is how it works, and blah, 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 blah. It's like we slowly figure out piece by piece what is going on, and nothing felt like it was spoon-fed to me, and I really, really respected that. So in any case, we get to the third act where basically she's like, the only way to stop this thing, you know, because the thing is, it needs someone to witness it. This is a metaphor for not only mental illness, but PTSD, and how trauma in and of itself can possess you and destroy you from within. The corrosive acid of trauma, and how, you know, it works with mental illness and how it works with PTSD.
Can I counter that argument though?
Go ahead.
Because in saying that you're not spoon-fed anything, I felt like it was very heavy-handed, the whole trauma aspect. Because everyone was like, oh yeah, they had a horrible backstory. And I also have a horrible backstory. It felt very forced, in my opinion.
Listen,
in an opposite way. Yeah.
you are 100% entitled to that. There's this thing when you're watching a movie, it's suspension of disbelief. It's subjective. Everybody's suspension of disbelief works differently. Some people have a higher tolerance for certain things than other people have. Yeah. There are things that I just can never buy. I can never buy The Dark Knight because I could never buy a Batman that would want to stop being Batman. You know what I'm saying? There's never a scenario where Batman is going to stop being Batman. I can't suspend my disbelief in that scenario. Mm-hmm. In this scenario, everything that bothered you did not bother me. I was like, I was sold. I was in the world. Yes. You know, I was down. I was absolutely down.
I was down until the third act. I think that's when it lost me, because although I said too many jump scares, they were effective. I agree with you there. They were very well done. But did we need 15 of them?
I was
it's a little much.
I kept thinking in my head, I'm like, okay. I'm like thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, it's been a little while since there's been a jump scare. We're gonna get another one.
It gets you,
I'm ready.
But at that point, those last two didn't feel effective, because you're like, here it comes.
Bro. They're like,
but I'll also mention, you went in blind. I think I would have appreciated the movie more if I went in blind. I saw only one trailer for this movie last week, and it gave away a lot of the big moments. It gave away the CGI scene, the first one.
Are you serious?
Yes, it also gave away when her therapist was actually the entity. So, two of the most effective scenes in the movie were spoiled in the trailer.
This here, what Darren is saying, this is a prime example as to why you need to not watch trailers. Go watch movies. Go in blind as possible. You know, when we get to that third act, you know, it's building up this idea that we've seen before. You gotta face your fear. So she goes to face her big dark secret at her mother's house. She basically let her mother die. So she goes back to the house to face that fear, and she comes face to face with this entity in the form of her mother. And you know, this is typical It fare. This is Pennywise 101, right? But here's the twist that this movie pulls off that subverts any expectation of any of the sort of source material that has come before that has clearly inspired this movie. she does something that we see in Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street, I would say, is another huge influence on this movie. She goes, I'm in control of her mind, as she's struggling with the entity who's shaped like her mother and sort of transforms into a really tall version of her mother and Marilyn Manson combined.
That's where it lost me.
Yeah. I mean, it was, for me, I thought that was so creepy. I didn't care. CGI didn't bother me at that point. I was like so sold. But she says, like, I am in control of my mind. And she breaks the arm of the entity and she sets the entity on fire and she leaves the house. And what the entity has been trying to show from the beginning, from the moment that she was infected, cursed, whatever, from the moment the thing was passed on to her, that she was never actually in control. The entity has always been in control. And we get that Descent. If you've ever seen The Descent, we get the fake ending, the fake happy ending. She drives to the cop's house. And I love that the cop was like her ex-boyfriend. Like, it added like this little extra layer of character and story and made it more plausible that he would be so invested. The movie is actually kind of hinged on the fact that he was an ex-boyfriend, because he does all these things for her with his, with his cop powers and for her, and it makes sense. For me, it totally worked, because like, that's what you would do if you were still hopelessly in love with someone who broke up with you. So she, has this phony ending with the cop, and then it turns out that she's right back in the house. And then we see what's happened to everybody in the chain, because it's a chain of, we see what happens to everybody. Basically, the entity overpowers, breaks your will. And what happens when you start to get the smile, you literally you go insane. You let your guard down, which allows the entity to crawl into your mouth. And we get to see what the entity is. And it's just the most horrible looking monster you can imagine. and it crawls into her mouth. And that's how it possesses you. And once the entity is inside of you and the smiling takes over, you are no longer you. You are now in the back seat, and the entity is ready to transfer itself to feed on someone else's trauma, and it does that by murdering its host. And it's just, it starts all over again. What the hell is this guy doing? Come on, what are you doing, you jabron?
But I guess I would say that for me, for every reason that you really enjoy those pieces, I feel that this can be done more effectively if it's subtle. Like, in the counter argument that I felt that a lot of the aspects of it were really forced down your throat, the ex-boyfriend scenario. I thought that would have been better if it was more subtle in, you see him wave to her as if he knows her. That shows there's a friendliness there in the beginning. And then the next time you see them together...
You have no idea.
Yeah, but the next time you see them again, like when she's knocking at that door, you're like, who is it? And then she goes into them. Now you know there's a relationship. And I think that's a subtle way of doing it. There's a subtle way about talking about trauma without being like, oh, that person was crazy traumatic. That person's a nutcase. And they just constantly said those phrases repeatedly to beat it over your head, for me. So,
by the way, shout out to Cal Penn. Random ass Cal Penn from Harold and Kumar. Yeah, that was awesome.
So I think that for me, because it's hard to talk about this movie without making comparisons to It Follows, but It Follows did it in a subtle way, and I think I wanted this to be subtle because it felt very forced. It Follows didn't even follow its own rules. There's no rules. Yes, it definitely breaks its rule in the third act. It breaks its rules
so many times.
It breaks its rule in the third act, and similarly, I feel like this movie didn't break a rule in the third act, but it went in a completely different direction.
It established a very simple rule, and the rule is the entity kills its host and then transfers into a new host. You can skip it by simply, murdering someone in front of someone else.
So here's an argument. I thought when she was driving in to this place that to finally get rid of the entity, couldn't she just, if no one was around, that would have ended it.
But she didn't want, she was hoping to, but this is what I thought was so brilliant about the story. She didn't want to. Her plan was that she would face down.
She would face her fears.
Entity,
I understand,
and that
but
she thought she was strong. She thought she was stronger than it.
Okay, but the entire time she was driving there, I was like, oh, she's gonna and then it's over. We're good. It's over. It's a wrap. And then the fact that she spent hours there just for someone to show up and it get worse, it was like maybe.
But that was
was
the entity. That's how insidious this entity was. It was like it let her think that she was in control. It let her think that she could defeat it. And then once her guard was down, it came back and was able to. She was so tired at that point. She's like, I just want to sleep. She was so tired. She was so beaten down that's when the entity can do its thing. Because the entity, it seems, can't really hurt you until it gets inside of you. That's when it possesses you. Everything else is it plays tricks on you to ruin your life, to get you to lower your guard, and then it jumps in your mouth. Super simple. You know, they say there's brilliance in simplicity. I think this movie has that in spades. So go ahead.
Two other points I want to make.
Yes.
So one of them, she was a menace around glass, wasn't she?
Yeah.
She broke 2 glasses.
She was a real
and
klutz.
She fell into and
Into
there
the
was
table.
a point, you remember the point where she wakes up in the middle of the night and she's pointing the knife at her husband?
Yeah.
I was just imagining her just opening a cabinet and just slamming some glass on the ground.
Oh my God.
Because she just kept doing that.
Just
That was
glass
really
breaking.
funny.
And she breaks the kerosene lamp at the end too. So.
But the other thing, going back to subtlety, I guess for me, it would have been more effective in the end if you don't show me what the entity looks like. I like being able to suspend myself in that way to say, this is just outside of my realm of understanding. There is no entity. I don't need a reasoning.
It was pretty fucking
I guess
good
for
looking
me,
entity though.
But I think for me, I'd rather not see the entity. I'd rather not have explanation.
9 times out of 10, it's not good to see 9 out of
Yes.
10 times, it's good to not see the entity.
Yeah.
In this 1 out of 10 time, the entity was satisfying enough to me, scary enough to me, where I was like, oh, and then she opens her mouth and I was like, oh,
funnily enough,
that's.
I liked how the entity looked at the very end.
That's what I'm saying,
I didn't
dude.
like the giant mom.
You didn't like the Marilyn Manson mom, but that's what I'm saying.
That's,
it pulls off its face. It shows what it really is. Again, we get no explanation. She doesn't go to the library. She doesn't open up some fucking old Necronomicon book. We just she speaks to some people who have dealt with it, and she's traced the lineage herself, of the lineage of herself, and that's it. And that worked so well for me. I was happy. And of course, perfect exposition at the beginning with the person who's dealing with the thing. And even she doesn't give it away. She's like, I'm not crazy. I'm dealing with this insane situation. Gives just enough information for her to go and trace the thing back. It worked. For me, it was airtight.
Yeah.
So we'll talk again. We will reconvene on Tuesday for Piggy and have another one of these discussions. Darren, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was fun.
We make stickers, banners, and buttons too. Posters and promo cards. There's nothing we can't print for you. From stage backdrops to bins from heads. We can print on shirts. We can print on hats. We can print on pants. Cheap prices and high quality. Quick turnaround times and free shipping. We also offer free artwork support. Great customer service and so much more. WriteStickers.com. Write stickers, we are the bomb. WriteStickers.com. Write stickers, we are the bomb. WriteStickers.com. Write stickers, we are the bomb. WriteStickers.com. Write stickers, we are the bomb.
Bye.